If you can play that piano, I'll marry you, he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Julian Thorne, a ruthless real estate magnate, believed money could buy anything, even silence. But in the quiet, storm-battered town of Oakhaven, he met his match in Elias Vance, the unassuming caretaker of the historic community hall Thorne aimed to demolish. When Thorne, in a moment of cruel amusement, dared Elias to play the decrepit grand piano with a promise of marriage should he succeed, he expected a fumbling, embarrassing spectacle. Instead, a melody soared through the dusty hall, a symphony of forgotten dreams and defiant hope, proving that true genius and the deepest love often reside where you least expect them, ready to challenge power, privilege, and the very foundations of a broken system. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. If you can play that piano, I'll marry you, Julian Thorne sneered, his voice cutting through the thick, musty air of Oakhaven Community Hall like a splinter of ice. The words hung suspended, an insult wrapped in an impossible dare, directed squarely at Elias Vance. Elias, a man whose hands knew the rough grain of wood and the stubborn grit of dust better than the smooth keys of an instrument, simply stood, a faded cloth draped over his shoulder, his gaze fixed on the antique grand piano that dominated the center of the room. It was an instrument that had been silent for decades, its ivory yellowed, its polished surface scarred by time and neglect, much like the hall itself. Julian Thorne, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that seemed out of place in the dilapidated hall, watched Elias with an air of amused disdain. His eyes, the color of cold steel, flickered from Elias's worn work boots to his calloused hands, then to the decrepit piano. Thorne had arrived in Oakhaven a month ago, a harbinger of change, or so he claimed. To the residents, he was simply the rich outsider, the ruthless developer determined to tear down their beloved hall to make way for a luxury resort. This gathering, ostensibly a community meeting, was merely a formality to him, another box to tick before he signed the demolition papers. The hall was packed, the usual folding chairs filled with the faces of Oakhaven, fishermen, shopkeepers, teachers, retirees. Their expressions mirrored a blend of hope, resignation, and weary defiance. They loved this hall, this vessel of their collective memories. First dances, town meetings, school plays, countless potlucks. It was the beating heart of their small coastal town, and Julian Thorne was threatening to rip it out. Elias Vance had been the caretaker here for 20 years, ever since his own dreams of a different life had shipwrecked on the shores of grief. He was a quiet man, his presence as unassuming as the sea fog that often crept into Oakhaven Harbor. But beneath his gentle demeanor lay a bedrock of resilience forged by loss and a profound love for his community. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every draft from a cracked window, every shadow the afternoon sun cast through the arched windows. He had polished the old piano many times, running his hands over its silent keys, a forgotten melody always humming in the back of his mind. "What's the matter, caretaker?" Thorne pushed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Cat got your tongue? Or perhaps your fingers are more accustomed to a broom than a keyboard?" A ripple of uncomfortable laughter, quickly stifled, went through Thorne's small entourage of city lawyers and assistants. The townspeople remained silent, their eyes shifting between Thorne and Elias, a tense expectancy building in the air. Elias finally met Thorne's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, quiet sadness that seemed to mirror the soul of the old hall. "The hall means a lot to us, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "More than just a building. It's history. It's family." Thorne scoffed. "History doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Vance, and sentimentality certainly won't save this rotting edifice. It's an eyesore, a liability, a gold mine waiting to be properly developed." He gestured dismissively at the peeling paint on the ceiling, the worn velvet of the stage curtains. "Now, about this piano. You seem rather fond of it. If you believe in this place so much, if you think it has any soul left, prove it. Play me a tune, a proper one, mind you. Something to convince me this old relic is worth more than scrap wood and broken strings." The proposition was outrageous, a cruel jest designed to humiliate. Everyone knew Elias was a caretaker, not a musician. The piano itself was a wreck. Its lid was scarred, its finish dull, and the last time anyone had heard it play was during Mrs. Gable's 75th birthday, nearly 30 years ago, and even then, it was just a few plinked notes. "A wager, then," Thorne continued, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. "A bit of sport. If you can play that piano, a melody so profound it moves me, truly moves me, I will reconsider my plans. In fact," he paused, letting the dramatic silence build, "if you can play that piano, Elias Vance, I'll marry you." The last words were clearly a mocking addition, meant to be absurd, to underscore the impossibility of the challenge. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, quickly followed by murmurs of indignation. Julian Thorne, the arrogant millionaire, offering his hand in marriage to Elias Vance, the humble caretaker. It was preposterous, a theatrical flourish of contempt. But for Elias, the words, even in their jest, held a strange weight. He looked at Thorne, then back at the piano. He remembered his mother, her fingers dancing across these very keys, filling the hall with music that could mend broken hearts and lift spirits. He remembered sitting beside her, a small boy, mesmerized by the magic she wove. That was before the accident, before the silence. He slowly walked towards the piano, the attention of every person in the hall fixed upon him. He carefully lifted the heavy, dusty lid, revealing the long expanse of yellowed keys. Some were chipped, some stuck at odd angles, but all were still there. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool ivory, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He sat down on the rickety bench, adjusting his weight, feeling the familiar, comforting creak. A hush fell over the hall, heavier than the dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the tall windows. Thorne watched, a look of smug expectation on his face. Ready for the inevitable, embarrassing failure, Elias closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He wasn't playing for Thorne. He was playing for Oakhaven, for his mother, for all the forgotten melodies still lingering in the heart of this old building. Then, his fingers, surprisingly nimble for hands accustomed to manual labor, hovered over the keys. He pressed down, gently at first, tentatively, and a single reedy note, surprisingly clear, echoed through the silence. It was a note of hesitant hope, a question hanging in the air. Then another and another, joining together, tentatively weaving a fragile thread of sound. The audience leaned forward, a collective breath held tight in their chests. Julian Thorne's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The melody began to take shape, hesitant no longer, but growing in confidence, in depth. It was a simple tune at first, reminiscent of old folk songs, of the crashing waves outside, of laughter and tears and shared meals. Elias's eyes were still closed, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if he were trying to recall a forgotten language. But it was more than just memory. It was passion. It was a lament for what was lost, and a fierce, undeniable prayer for what could still be saved. The piano, long considered beyond repair, seemed to awaken under his touch, its voice rising from a whisper to a clear, resonant song that filled the hall, shaking the very dust from the rafters. The chords swelled, deep and rich, carrying a weight of emotion that seemed to pour from Elias's very soul, painting a vibrant picture of Oak Haven's enduring spirit. Julian Thorne, who had expected a cacophony of rusty springs and fumbled notes, found himself utterly transfixed. The cynical amusement drained from his face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Elias Vance, the quiet caretaker, was not just playing the piano. He was playing it like a virtuoso, like a master whose talent had been hidden for a lifetime, waiting for this very moment to ignite and challenge the world with its incandescent brilliance. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was heartbreaking, defiant, and profoundly, unexpectedly alive. And as the final lingering notes faded, leaving an almost physical echo in the hushed hall, Julian Thorne realized, with a sickening jolt, that he had just challenged a genius, and the joke was entirely on him. Elias slowly opened his eyes, his gaze locking with Thorne's, a silent question hanging between them, heavier than any spoken word. Julian Thorne's face, usually a mask of controlled indifference, was a roadmap of conflicting emotions: disbelief, humiliation, and a terrifying spark of rage. The last note Elias had played still shimmered in the air, a silent testament to the impossible. The hall was utterly still, every eye fixed on Thorne, waiting for his move. He, the master manipulator, had been outmaneuvered, not by a lawyer or a rival executive, but by a quiet caretaker and a dusty piano. The dare, meant to be a cruel joke, had backfired spectacularly, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. That was... Thorne finally stammered, his voice hoarse, utterly stripped of its earlier arrogance. He looked around, seeking refuge, a friendly face, but found none. The townspeople, moments ago resigned, now met his gaze with a unified front of quiet triumph. The air thrummed with their collective vindication. Elias, still seated at the piano, simply looked at him, his expression unreadable, yet radiating a quiet strength Thorne found profoundly unsettling. "Beautiful, Mr. Thorne?" Elias offered softly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Or perhaps profoundly moving." Thorne's jaw clenched. The thought of his absurd wager, "marry you," echoed in his ears, a public promise he now had to contend with. His reputation, built on ruthless efficiency and unwavering resolve, was crumbling under the weight of a musical performance. He could feel the eyes of his own entourage on him, their carefully neutral faces betraying a flicker of incredulity. This was a nightmare. He pushed back from the table he'd been leaning on, his chair scraping loudly, shattering the delicate silence. "This changes nothing," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "A parlor trick, a performance. It doesn't alter the fact that this building is dilapidated, a financial drain, and a hazard." He pointed a rigid finger at a section of the ceiling where a faint water stain bloomed. "Do you expect me to believe that a few antiquated melodies suddenly make this liability sound? It gives it a voice, Mr. Thorne." Elias countered, rising slowly from the piano bench, his posture straight, his eyes holding Thorn's. A voice that speaks of community, of memory, of worth beyond your ledgers and profit margins. A murmur of agreement rippled through the townsfolk. Mrs. Gable, a spry woman in her 80s who had lived in Oakhaven her entire life, stood up, her voice surprisingly firm. This hall built this town, Mr. Thorne. My first dance was here. My son's graduation was here. My husband's memorial was here. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's the very soul of Oakhaven. Other voices joined in, a rising chorus of personal anecdotes, each story a thread woven into the fabric of the community hall. Thorne felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. This wasn't just a financial transaction anymore. It was a war for the heart of a town, and he was losing on all fronts. His well-rehearsed arguments about modernization and economic benefit seemed hollow, discordant against the passionate sincerity of their words. I made a proposition, Mr. Thorne, Elias continued, stepping away from the piano, closing the distance between them. A wager, you called it. You promised to reconsider your plans if I could play a melody that moved you, and you added a rather extreme condition, if I recall. There was a flicker of something in Elias's eyes then, not malice, but a shrewd glint Thorne hadn't expected. Thorne felt a trap closing around him. He couldn't possibly marry this man, a caretaker, in front of the world. It would be a scandal, a mockery of his entire existence. Yet, to retract his words now, after such a public display of Elias's talent, would be an admission of defeat, a dent in his armor of invincibility he couldn't afford. The marriage part was obviously hyperbole, Mr. Vance, a jest. Perhaps, Elias conceded, a slight tilt to his head. But the part about reconsidering your plans, that seemed rather earnest. And from your expression, I believe the music did, in fact, move you. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. Thorne had been moved. He who prided himself on his impenetrable pragmatism had felt a stirring, a tremor, a memory of something long buried as Elias played. The music had been raw, powerful, evocative. It had momentarily stripped away his cynicism, leaving him vulnerable, exposed. It was a sensation he detested. His gaze hardened. Very well, Thorne said, his voice regaining some of its steely edge, albeit tinged with grudging respect. You played, impressively. I will reconsider my plans for a period of 1 week. He held up a finger, emphasizing the limited reprieve. But understand this, Mr. Vance. Reconsideration does not mean cancellation. It means I will explore alternative options, however unlikely. And if you think a week of silence from me means this hall is safe, you are sorely mistaken. He scanned the faces of the townsfolk. In fact, let's make it more interesting. In 1 week, I will present my final decision. And in that week, you, Mr. Vance, must convince me, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this hall has a viable future, economically and structurally. Not with music, but with facts. Real, tangible plans. Otherwise, the demolition proceeds as scheduled. He turned to his legal team. Draw up the papers for a 1-week moratorium and find every single code violation, every structural deficiency, every financial black hole associated with this historical treasure. He shot a venomous look at Elias. Let's see if your genius extends beyond the piano keys, Mr. Vance. With that, Thorne strode out of the hall, his entourage scrambling to follow, leaving behind a swirl of dust and a fresh wave of hope mixed with dread. The townspeople burst into applause, cheering for Elias, embracing him. He had bought them time. He had given them a chance. But Elias felt a hollow ache. He had played, yes. He had opened a door. But Thorne had just raised the stakes to an impossible height. Tangible plans? Structural viability? He was a caretaker, not an architect or an urban planner. He knew the hall's heart, but not its blueprints or its balance sheets. As the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving him alone once more with the silent piano, he felt the weight of his mother's legacy pressing down on him. She had taught him to play, had filled this hall with joy and music. But she had also taught him something else, something whispered in the quiet moments before her illness took her. The importance of fighting for what you believe in, no matter the odds. Elias ran a hand over the piano keys again. This wasn't just about saving a building. It was about honoring his past and finding a future for Oakhaven. He remembered her words, clear as the melody he'd just played. Sometimes, Elias, the greatest strengths are found in the quietest places, and the most powerful battles are fought with the heart. But how could his heart fight Julian Thorne's endless resources? He was still pondering this when the hall door creaked open again. A young woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, her auburn hair catching the fading sunlight, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. It was Sarah Jensen, the town's new elementary school teacher, a fierce advocate for Oakhaven's history, and a woman Elias had found himself noticing more and more lately. She hadn't left with the others. She had stayed. "Elias," she began, her voice a soft whisper that somehow cut through the silence. That was incredible. But what happens now? What can we do? Her eyes held a desperate plea, a reflection of the town's fragile hope. Elias looked at her, then back at the silent piano, and knew that the week Thorne had granted them was not a reprieve, but a ticking time bomb. And he had no idea how to disarm it. What can we do? Sarah's question echoed Elias's own silent fears. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in the fading light, and saw not just a concerned teacher, but a kindred spirit, someone who felt the town's pulse as deeply as he did. Her eyes, the color of warm amber, held a spark of determination that ignited a flicker of hope within him. "We fight," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm, the conviction growing with each word. "We show Mr. Thorne that Oakhaven is more than a line item on his balance sheet. This hall, it's the heartbeat of this town, and you can't put a price on that." He gestured to the vast empty space around them. "But he's right about one thing. Heart isn't enough. We need a plan, a tangible plan." Sarah nodded, stepping further into the hall. "He wants facts, figures, proof that the hall can be economically viable and structurally sound. That's a tall order for 1 week, Elias, especially when he has an army of experts." Her gaze swept over the peeling paint, the worn stage, the general air of charming decay. "But it's not impossible. This isn't just a building to the children I teach. It's where they've learned to dream, where they've performed their first plays. Losing it would be like losing a piece of their future." The shared passion for Oakhaven, for its children, forged an immediate, unspoken alliance between them. They spent the rest of that evening hunched over the hall's dusty old records, Elias pulling out boxes from a forgotten storage closet beneath the stage, Sarah poring over faded ledgers and yellowed architectural sketches. They discovered that the hall, built in the early 1900s, had been funded by community donations and a grant from a distant, benevolent relative of the town's founder. There were no detailed blueprints, only rough schematics, and a dizzying array of handwritten notes about repairs done decades ago. This is a mess, Elias, Sarah admitted, rubbing her temples. How are we supposed to estimate repair costs or create a proposal for future use when we barely know what's holding it up? Elias sighed, running a hand over his tired face. It's like trying to rebuild a ship with only a sailor's logbook. He looked at the piano, remembering the flow of music, the ease with which he'd found the notes. This task felt monumental, discordant. The next morning, news of Elias's impossible performance and Thorne's one-week ultimatum had galvanized the town. An emergency meeting, hastily called by Mrs. Gable, filled the hall again, this time with a new energy, a fierce determination. Elias and Sarah presented Thorne's challenge, laying out the daunting task before them. "We need an architect," Sarah declared, "someone to assess the structure, to draw up new plans. And an engineer," Elias added, "to certify its safety. And a fundraiser," Mrs. Gable chimed in, "to pay for it all." The room buzzed with ideas, with offers of help. Mr. Henderson, a retired carpenter, volunteered to inspect the framework. Mrs. Peterson, the former town clerk, offered to dig through old zoning laws. But as the initial enthusiasm waned, the stark reality of their limited resources began to sink in. Oakhaven didn't have a local architect or engineer, and the nearest ones were hours away, their fees exorbitant. "This is exactly what Thorne wants," a fisherman grumbled, his brow furrowed. "He knows we don't have the money or the connections." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He saw the doubt creeping back into their eyes, the weariness that had settled over Oakhaven long before Thorne arrived. He had given them hope, but now he risked extinguishing it entirely. That night, Elias and Sarah worked late again, the only light coming from a single bare bulb hanging over their makeshift workspace. Sarah, usually so bright, looked disheartened. "I called 3 architectural firms," she reported, her voice flat. "They all want retainers we can't afford, and none can commit to a site visit before the end of the week." Elias leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "It felt so different when I was playing the piano, like I could make anything happen. Now." He trailed off, staring blankly at the scattered papers. The silence of the hall pressed in on them, heavier than usual. "Don't give up, Elias," Sarah whispered, her hand gently touching his arm, a spark of comfort in the despair. "Your music woke something up in us. It reminded us what we're fighting for. We just need to find another way." They talked for hours, sharing their fears, their hopes for Oakhaven. Sarah spoke of her dream of expanding the school's arts program, of creating a safe, inspiring space for the town's children. Elias, in turn, found himself recounting stories of his mother, her vibrant spirit, her unwavering belief that music could heal anything. He spoke of the day she had first taught him to play, right there on that very piano, filling the hall with a joy he thought he'd never hear again. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving a tapestry of shared dreams and mutual understanding. As the moon climbed higher, casting long shadows through the arched windows, Sarah, idly sifting through a stack of brittle, forgotten documents, stopped suddenly. "Elias, what's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with discovery. She held up a single yellowed sheet of paper, brittle with age, tucked within a ledger detailing maintenance repairs from the 1950s. It wasn't a blueprint. It wasn't a deed. It was a letter, dated over 80 years ago, addressed to the Oakhaven Community Hall. The ornate handwriting was difficult to decipher, but the words that jumped out at Elias sent a jolt through him. electrifying him with a sudden, impossible hope. To ensure the enduring spirit and structural integrity of the hall, a trust fund has been established in perpetuity, to be overseen by the Oakhaven Historical Society for the sole purpose of maintenance, repair, and future improvements. A trust fund? In perpetuity? Elias snatched the letter, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a revelation. It meant the hall might not be a financial black hole after all. It meant Oakhaven might have a hidden arsenal, a forgotten weapon in its fight against Julian Thorne. But what was the Oakhaven Historical Society? And where was this trust fund now? The clock was ticking, and they had just stumbled upon a mystery that could save everything or lead them down another dead end. The words, trust fund, in perpetuity, burned into Elias's mind, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. He and Sarah stared at the letter, its brittle edges testament to forgotten promises, a lifeline discovered in the 11th hour. The Oakhaven Historical Society. Where was it now? What was its role? The questions tumbled out, urgent and demanding. The Historical Society? Sarah mused, her brow furrowed in concentration. I remember seeing a faded sign years ago on the old Mariners Bank building downtown. It's been empty for decades, boarded up. A sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through Elias. If this trust fund existed, if it still held any funds, it could be the game changer. It could provide the resources they so desperately needed to secure the hall's future, to prove Thorne wrong. The thought propelled them both to action. It was nearly midnight, but neither sleep nor exhaustion could deter them. They drove Elias's ancient pickup truck through the deserted streets of Oakhaven, the salty night air whipping through the open windows. The old Mariners Bank building loomed ahead, a relic of a bygone era, its windows dark and forbidding. The faint, peeling paint of a sign above the double doors, barely legible in the moonlight, confirmed Sarah's memory. Oakhaven Historical Society. Estimated 1912. The building was locked tight, its entrance barricaded with heavy boards. Elias, with his caretaker's knack for getting into places others couldn't, quickly found a loose panel in the back, a forgotten service entrance. With a grunt and a splintered hand, he pried it open, revealing a narrow, dusty corridor that smelled of damp earth and stale memories. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the scurry of unseen creatures and the rapid thumping of their own hearts. Moonlight filtered through grimy windows, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. They moved cautiously through the cavernous lobby, once grand, now crumbling. Desks were overturned, papers scattered, everything coated in a thick layer of dust. Looks like it's been untouched for 50 years, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. If there was a historical society here, it certainly hasn't been active recently. Their search led them to a small, cluttered back office, overflowing with dusty boxes and forgotten files. It was clear no one had bothered with a proper clean-out. This was where the real hunt began. They dug through stacks of moldering ledgers, yellowed photographs of stern-faced founders, and countless newspaper clippings detailing Oakhaven's vibrant past, its fishing industry, its early settlers, even a faded article about the community hall's grand opening. Hours crawled by. Hope began to wane, replaced by the crushing weight of disappointment. Each empty box, each irrelevant document, felt like a nail in the coffin of their dreams. The trust fund letter, so promising just a few hours ago, now felt like a cruel mirage. Maybe it was just a proposal, Sarah sighed, wiping dust from her face. A good intention that never materialized. Or maybe the funds were depleted years ago. Elias refused to give up. His fingers, accustomed to feeling for loose nails and weakened joints, methodically sifted through a final, heavy box. It was tucked away behind a broken filing cabinet, heavier than the others, and sealed with a brittle string. He untied it, revealing not old papers, but a small wooden strongbox, its brass clasp tarnished green with age. His heart leapt. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. They both stared at it, a pulse of anticipation thrumming between them. The box wasn't locked, but its contents were hidden beneath a false bottom. Elias carefully removed it, revealing a small stack of documents and a single, heavy, old-fashioned key. Among the documents was an original, beautifully handwritten trust indenture, dated 1935, explicitly outlining the Oak Haven Community Hall Perpetual Maintenance Trust. It detailed annual disbursements, investment strategies, and listed the Mariners Bank as the original trustee. Most importantly, it included a current, notarized statement, dated just 5 years ago, indicating a substantial balance, enough to not only repair the hall, but to ensure its upkeep for decades to come. The most recent signatory was an executor in the nearby city of Portside, a name Elias didn't recognize. "It's real," Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's actually real. The money is there, Elias." Elias clutched the documents, a profound sense of relief washing over him, quickly followed by a fierce determination. Thorne had been wrong. They weren't just fighting with sentiment. They had tangible financial proof. The key, however, remained a mystery. It was too ornate for a filing cabinet, too large for the strongbox itself. As they emerged into the pre-dawn light, blinking against the first pale rays of sunrise, Elias felt a renewed vigor. They had proof, and they had a lead. Their next step was clear: find the executor in Portside. But as they drove back towards the hall, a sense of foreboding tightened its grip. Julian Thorne had eyes and ears everywhere. If he discovered this trust fund before they could secure it, he would surely find a way to discredit it, to seize control, or worse, to dismantle it. They arrived back at the community hall just as the first fishing boats were heading out to sea. Elias's truck rattled to a stop, and they both jumped out, eager to finalize their strategy. But as Elias approached the front doors, a chill snaked down his spine. The lock, which he had secured just hours before, was clearly tampered with. It looked recently forced. He pushed the door open, his heart pounding. The interior of the hall was a mess. Tables were overturned. Papers they had painstakingly organized were strewn across the floor, and the old records box he'd pulled from beneath the stage was now lying open, its contents spilled everywhere. Someone had been there. Someone had been searching. And then his gaze fell on the piano. The lid was open, and the keys, which he had left in their silent, dignified repose, were now marred by a long, deep scratch, as if someone had deliberately run a sharp object across them. It was a message, chilling and clear. Julian Thorne knew, and he wasn't playing fair. Elias looked at Sarah, her face paling in the harsh morning light. The 1 week was no longer just a deadline. It was a race, and Julian Thorne had just declared open war. The scratched piano keys screamed a silent warning louder than any shout. Julian Thorne knew. The violation of the hall felt deeply personal to Elias, a direct assault on the heart of Oak Haven and on his own resolve. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The trust documents, clutched in Elias's hand, felt suddenly fragile, vulnerable. "He sent someone," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with fear. He must have heard about us searching the bank. He's trying to intimidate us, to find whatever we found. Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't find it. He held up the trust indenture, the official-looking papers a stark contrast to the chaos around them. It was hidden better than he anticipated. His gaze swept across the ransacked hall, the overturned chairs, the scattered flyers from previous town events. This was Thorne's response to his music, a calculated act of aggression designed to break their spirit. But it only fueled Elias's anger, hardening his resolve. We need to get to Portside now, Elias declared, his voice firm. Before Thorne finds out about the executor, before he can twist this, or worse, make the trust disappear. The drive to Portside, a bustling city an hour away, was a blur of heightened anxiety. Every car that pulled up behind them felt like Thorne's surveillance, every passing glance a potential spy. Sarah, usually composed, kept glancing at the rearview mirror, her fingers drumming nervously on her knee. Elias, despite his own unease, tried to maintain a calm facade, knowing that his quiet strength was what Sarah and Oakhaven needed. They arrived at the impressive modern building where the executor's firm was located. The contrast between Oakhaven's weathered charm and Portside's gleaming steel and glass felt stark, a symbol of the world Thorne inhabited. Elias, in his work clothes, felt acutely aware of the expensive suits and polished shoes hurrying past them. He was a fish out of water, but he carried the weight of Oakhaven on his shoulders. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde ponytail, looked them over with polite skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone already signaling an impending refusal. "No," Elias stated, holding up the trust indenture. "But we have urgent business regarding the Oakhaven Community Hall Perpetual Maintenance Trust. We need to speak to Mr. Richard Caldwell, the executor, immediately." The name seemed to pique her interest. She made a call, her voice hushed. After a tense 5-minute wait, during which Elias felt every second tick by like an hour, they were ushered into a minimalist office adorned with abstract art. Richard Caldwell, a man in his late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a perpetually worried frown, greeted them. "Mr. Vance, Miss Jensen," Caldwell began, gesturing to the seats opposite his large mahogany desk. My apologies for the mess at the Oakhaven Historical Society office. We were retrieving some documents on behalf of Mr. Julian Thorne." Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "Retrieving documents? Or searching for something specific?" he challenged, his voice tight. "The hall was ransacked last night after we discovered this." He laid the trust indenture on Caldwell's desk, pushing it across. Caldwell picked up the document, his eyes scanning the elegant script. His worried frown deepened. "Ah, yes. The Perpetual Maintenance Trust. It's an old one. Highly unusual, in fact. We've been the acting executor for the past decade, but frankly, it's been dormant. No one from Oakhaven has ever inquired about it." He paused, looking at them intently. Until now. And Mr. Thorne was certainly interested in its status. "What did he ask you?" Sarah pressed, leaning forward. "He inquired about any hidden assets or legal encumbrances on the Oakhaven Community Hall property," Caldwell admitted, choosing his words carefully. "He mentioned some public opposition to his development plans and wanted to ensure all his bases were covered. He also specifically asked if any trust funds related to the hall were still active." Caldwell looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I told him that, to my knowledge, the Historical Society was defunct, and any associated funds were likely dormant or liquidated long ago. It's been decades since anyone contacted us about it." You told him it was dormant? Elias asked, his voice low, a storm brewing within him. While holding the keys to its substantial assets? Caldwell flinched. Mr. Vance, the legal intricacies of these older trusts can be challenging. We simply assumed it was inactive. Without direct instruction or inquiry from the beneficiaries, our hands are often tied. He pointed to the indenture. It specifically states that the Oak Haven Historical Society is the oversight body. Without an active society, the trust's directives are unclear. But the funds are there? Sarah interjected, her voice filled with desperate hope. Yes, Caldwell confirmed, albeit reluctantly. The principal has grown significantly over the decades, thanks to prudent investments. It's a considerable sum, more than enough to restore the hall and keep it operational for many years. A wave of relief washed over Elias, quickly followed by a fresh surge of urgency. Then we need to activate it, he said, slamming his hand lightly on the desk. We need to reform the Oak Haven Historical Society. We need legal representation to confirm our rights to these funds. And we need to do it before Julian Thorne finds a way to challenge or usurp it. Caldwell nodded slowly, rubbing his chin. You're right. Mr. Thorne is a formidable opponent. He has already indicated he intends to thoroughly investigate any unexpected developments. If he discovers the full extent of this trust, he will likely attempt to argue that without a continuously active historical society, the trust has no valid beneficiaries, or that the funds should revert to the public domain, perhaps even to a state development fund, which he would then have influence over. Caldwell looked at them, a hint of respect entering his eyes. You've opened a very significant door, Mr. Vance, but you've also opened a Pandora's box. This will be a fight. We're ready to fight, Elias stated, meeting Caldwell's gaze. Oak Haven is ready. As they left Caldwell's office, the weight of the trust documents felt different in Elias's hands. A heavy responsibility, but also a powerful shield. They had confirmation, they had funds, and they had a path forward. But Thorne was clearly already working to undermine them. The scratched piano keys, the ransacked hall, Caldwell's evasive answers. It all pointed to a direct, escalating conflict. Back in Elias's truck, driving away from the gleaming city, Sarah turned to him, her expression a mix of exhilaration and renewed fear. What was that key for, Elias? She asked, remembering the small, ornate key they had found in the strongbox with the trust documents. Caldwell didn't seem to recognize it, or if he did, he didn't let on. Elias pulled the key from his pocket, turning it over in his palm. It felt old, heavy, and held a strange sense of importance. I don't know, he admitted, his eyes scanning the key's intricate design. But my gut tells me it's connected to all of this. It feels like another secret, waiting to be unlocked. The road ahead was long, and the battle for Oak Haven was far from over. Thorne was a shark, and they had just shown him their blood. The next move, Elias knew, had to be theirs. But what did the key unlock? And where would it lead them? The answer, he suspected, might be the final piece in their desperate puzzle, or another trap laid by a ruthless adversary. The ornate key felt heavy in Elias's palm, a tantalizing mystery amidst the chaos of their fight for Oak Haven. Its intricate design, unlike any lock he'd ever seen, seemed to whisper secrets from the past. Sarah's question about its purpose lingered, a silent challenge. They had the trust fund, a powerful weapon, but this key felt like something more personal, perhaps even vital. Back in Oak Haven, the news of the trust fund spread like wildfire. Hope, once a flickering ember, now roared to life. The town buzzed with renewed energy. They had found their financial lifeline. But with hope came the stark realization of the task ahead. Reactivating the Oak Haven Historical Society, securing legal counsel, and devising a viable, tangible plan for the hall, all before Thorne's one-week deadline expired. That afternoon, a hastily assembled Oak Haven United Committee met in the still disordered hall. Mrs. Gable, with her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, immediately took charge of drafting new society bylaws. Mr. Henderson, the retired carpenter, began a meticulous structural assessment, his experienced eyes scanning for every beam, every joist. Sarah, with her organizational skills, started cataloging possible uses for the hall, brainstorming events and programs that would draw both locals and tourists. Elias, however, couldn't shake the pull of the key. While the others worked, a frantic, almost feverish energy filling the hall, he quietly slipped away to his small caretaker's workshop, a sanctuary of tools and forgotten projects. He meticulously cleaned the key, revealing a faint, almost invisible inscription on its bow, a stylized V intertwined with a musical note. A V, Vance, his family name. A shiver ran down his spine. His mother's family had been among the town's earliest settlers, deeply involved in the community hall's founding. Could this key be linked to his own family? He thought of his mother, her love for music, her quiet strength. He remembered her often saying, "There are treasures in plain sight, Elias, if you only know where to look and what they're truly for." He returned to the hall, the key now glinting faintly on a chain around his neck. He began to search, his eyes seeing the hall in a new light, not just as a building he cared for, but as a repository of hidden stories. He checked every loose floorboard he knew of, every hidden panel, every rarely opened cabinet. Nothing. The key remained stubbornly without a lock. Sarah found him later, kneeling by the old fireplace, tapping at the bricks. "Elias, what are you doing?" she asked, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Shouldn't you be helping us strategize how to fend off Thorne's legal eagles?" Elias stood, brushing dust from his knees. "This key," he said, holding it out. "I think it belongs to my family, and I think it holds another secret connected to this hall." He explained the inscription, the feeling that it was important. Sarah's eyes widened with renewed curiosity. She took the key, turning it over in her fingers. Her gaze, sharper and more observant than his, scanned the hall. "A secret, huh? Your mother was quite the musician, wasn't she? And she loved this piano." She walked over to the grand piano, running her hand over the keyboard, her fingers tracing the deliberate scratch Thorne's crony had left. "It's like he knew this piano was important to you, Elias. He tried to wound you through it." Elias nodded, the pain of that defilement still fresh. It was her piano in a way. She played it more than anyone. Sarah's eyes lit up. The piano. What if the key isn't for a traditional lock? What if it's part of the piano itself? She carefully examined the instrument, running her fingers along the ornate carvings, the polished brass hinges. Half these old instruments sometimes had hidden compartments, special mechanisms. Together, they meticulously explored every inch of the grand piano. Elias had cleaned it countless times, but never with this intent, this intimate focus. They checked beneath the keyboard, inside the soundboard, along the inner frame. Then, Sarah noticed a small, almost imperceptible seam along the side panel, near where the music stand would rest. It was cleverly disguised, flush with the wood grain, but now, knowing what to look for. It was clear. Elias's fingers, trembling slightly, traced the seam. He pressed. A small section of the wood, barely a few inches wide, clicked inward, revealing a tiny, almost hidden keyhole. It was so small, so perfectly crafted, it was nearly invisible to the casual observer. It was an antique mechanism, discreet and elegant. The key slid in perfectly. Elias turned it with a soft click, and the panel, no bigger than his hand, sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small leather-bound journal and a single yellowed photograph. Elias's hands shook as he picked up the photograph. It was of his mother, vibrant and young, smiling broadly, her arms around a tall, handsome man he didn't recognize, standing in front of the community hall. But it was the journal that held his gaze. He opened it, his heart pounding. The familiar, elegant script of his mother filled the pages. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a collection of her most cherished memories of Oakhaven, of the hall, of the music she played. But as he turned the pages, he found something else. Detailed notes, meticulously recorded, about the hall's construction, its history, its secret passages. And then, a series of entries that made his breath catch in his throat. His mother had not just been a musician, she had been an amateur historian, a meticulous archivist. She had chronicled the hall's structural weaknesses, yes, but also a series of ingenious, cost-effective repairs her own father, a skilled craftsman, had implemented. She had drawn diagrams, listed materials, and noted the precise locations of reinforcement points. Crucially, she had also detailed the original, complete blueprints, which she had copied from an old architect's office before they were lost in a fire. She'd kept them hidden, knowing their value, wanting them to be found only when the hall truly needed them. Elias, Sarah breathed, peering over his shoulder, her eyes wide as she saw the detailed drawings and meticulous notes. These are incredible. This isn't just a diary. It's a detailed historical and structural record. It's better than any modern assessment. Your mother, she knew everything. Elias looked at the photograph of his mother, a pang of deep longing mixed with profound gratitude. She hadn't just taught him to play the piano, she had left him the answers he needed, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment. This journal wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. It was the blueprint, quite literally, to saving the Oakhaven Community Hall. It was the detailed, tangible plan Thorne had demanded, backed by the very history he sought to erase. But as he looked up, meeting Sarah's excited gaze, a chilling thought struck him. If his mother knew so much, if she documented so much, why had she kept it a secret? Why the hidden compartment, the enigmatic key? And what other secrets, perhaps more dangerous, might this journal hold? The game had just changed. Thorne might have ransacked the hall, but he hadn't found this. Yet, Elias knew, the millionaire wouldn't give up. The true battle was only just beginning, and they now held a treasure map. But to what exact fortune, or what lurking dangers, he could not yet say. The weight of his mother's journal in Elias's hands was immense, heavier than any tool he'd ever held. It wasn't just a diary, it was a testament, a time capsule of Oakhaven's soul, meticulously preserved by the woman who had nurtured him and this hall. Sarah, her face alight with awe, flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the delicate script, the intricate diagrams. "Elias, this is everything," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Original blueprints, detailed repair logs, structural analysis by your grandfather. It's irrefutable proof of the hall's integrity and a roadmap for its future." Thorne asked for a tangible plan. Your mother provided it decades ago. A bittersweet smile touched Elias's lips as he looked at the photograph of his mother, youthful and vibrant. She always said the answers were often found where you least expected them. She didn't just leave me the piano. She left me the knowledge to save it. The discovery of the journal electrified the Oak Haven United Committee. When Elias and Sarah presented its contents, the detailed plans, the structural assessments, the cost-effective repair strategies, a wave of exhilaration swept through the hall. Mr. Henderson, the retired carpenter, pored over the diagrams, his eyes gleaming. This is masterful. Your grandfather was a genius, Elias. These reinforcements are solid, far better than modern construction. The hall is sound, despite its age. With renewed fervor, the committee sprang into action. Sarah took charge of digitizing the journal's contents, creating a polished, professional presentation for Thorne. Mrs. Gable, emboldened by the concrete evidence, began mobilizing the town's legal defenses, reaching out to a pro bono environmental lawyer known for fighting corporate developers. As the days dwindled towards Thorne's deadline, a palpable energy coursed through Oak Haven. The hall, once a symbol of slow decay, became a beacon of resilience. Volunteers patched walls, repainted trim, and polished floors, not just with elbow grease, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just fixing a building, they were reclaiming their heritage. Elias, though deeply involved, couldn't shake the lingering question. Why the secrecy? Why had his mother hidden such vital information? It gnawed at him, a discordant note in their symphony of success. He spent his evenings poring over the journal, not just for the structural details, but for clues to his mother's deeper intentions. One evening, as Sarah worked beside him, preparing the final presentation, he found it. Tucked into the very last page, almost an afterthought, was a folded, delicate letter, sealed with a dried flower. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was his mother's final entry, dated just weeks before her passing. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The words, though faded, seemed to leap off the page, filled with a poignant, heartbreaking clarity. My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, then the hall and Oak Haven are in peril. I know I kept these secrets, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of losing Oak Haven, not to fire or decay, but to greed. I learned many things in my life, Elias, about people and power. I saw how quickly precious things could be taken, how easily history could be rewritten by those with influence. There was a time long ago when a ruthless businessman, much like the one I suspect you're now fighting, tried to seize control of Oak Haven, to turn it into something it was never meant to be. My father, your grandfather, fought him with everything he had, and these plans, this trust fund, were his counter-strategy. He ensured the hall would always have the means to protect itself, hidden from prying eyes, known only to a trusted few who understood its true value. But I also learned that people like him don't just walk away. They find new ways. I worried that if these documents were publicly known, they could be challenged, co-opted, or worse, used against Oak Haven in ways I couldn't foresee. So I hid them, trusting that when the time was right, when the need was truly great, you, my son, would find them. You have my hands, Elias, but you also have my heart, and it is with your heart that you will truly save Oak Haven. There is one more thing. The man who tried to take Oak Haven then. His name was Julian Thorne, the grandfather of the man you now face. The cycle, it seems, continues. Be brave, my son. Be Oak Haven. Elias read the letter again, the words echoing in the sudden silence of the hall. Julian Thorne, the grandfather. The same name, the same ruthless ambition. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a generations-long conflict, a legacy of land versus legacy of love. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a building. It was about stopping a recurring tragedy, about breaking a cycle that threatened to consume Oakhaven. Sarah, seeing the change in his expression, the sudden pallor, reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Elias? What is it?" He handed her the letter, his voice barely a whisper. "It's him. It's always been him." As Sarah read, her face hardened, a fierce protectiveness replacing her earlier concern. The discovery changed everything. This wasn't just a developer. This was a family feud spanning decades, a deeply personal vendetta against Oakhaven and the Vance family. Julian Thorne wasn't just trying to make money. He was trying to finish what his grandfather had started, to erase the defiance of the past. The stakes had just skyrocketed. Elias felt a cold dread mix with a burning resolve. Thorne wouldn't simply dismiss their evidence now. He would fight them with every resource he had, armed with a family history of spite. The 1-week deadline was almost up. The final meeting with Thorne was tomorrow. Elias knew he had to confront Thorne, not just with facts and figures, but with the painful truth of their shared history. He had to make Thorne see the ghost of his own past, and somehow break the cycle. But how do you change a man whose very identity is tied to generations of ruthless ambition? How do you make him see the value of a legacy he's been taught to destroy? The answer, Elias knew, lay not just in the hall, but in the echoes of a past that refused to be silenced. And he had to be ready for Thorne's inevitable counterattack, which he suspected would be as personal as it was brutal. The revelation of Julian Thorne's family legacy, of his grandfather's past vendetta against Oakhaven, hit Elias with the force of a tidal wave. It was more than a business deal. It was a deeply personal, generational conflict. Sarah, having read the letter, looked at Elias, her eyes reflecting the same dawning horror and fierce resolve. The air in the hall, once filled with hope, now thrummed with a heavy, dangerous tension. "He's not just a developer," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with anger. "He's a man driven by a family ghost, trying to finish what his grandfather started. This isn't about profit for him. It's about conquering Oakhaven." Elias nodded, the journal and his mother's letter still clutched in his hands. He wants to erase the past, to destroy the symbol of Oakhaven's defiance. This hall, to him, is a monument to his family's past defeat. The weight of his own family's legacy, of his mother's brave foresight, settled heavily on his shoulders. He felt a connection to his mother and to his grandfather, stronger than ever before. This was their fight, now his. The day of the final meeting dawned cold and gray, mirroring the apprehension that hung over Oakhaven. The hall had been meticulously cleaned and decorated, adorned with fresh flowers and photographs of past community events, a defiant statement of its living history. The townspeople gathered again, their faces a mixture of anxiety and renewed resolve. They knew the stakes were higher than ever. Julian Thorne arrived precisely on time, his expensive car cutting a stark line against the weathered facade of the hall. He strode in, flanked by his legal team, his expression a carefully constructed mask of confident authority. But Elias, now armed with the knowledge of Thorne's family history, noticed a subtle tension in his jaw, a flicker of something guarded in his cold eyes. Thorne wasn't just here for a meeting. He was here to confront a ghost, The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Thorne took his seat opposite Elias and the Oakhaven United Committee, his gaze sweeping over the polished hall, the expectant faces. He noticed the restored vibrancy, the new paint, the shining floors. His lips thinned. "Good morning," Thorne began, his voice devoid of warmth. "I commend you on your efforts to spruce up this old building. However, cosmetic changes do not alter its fundamental liabilities." He gestured to one of his lawyers, who immediately produced a thick binder. "As per our agreement, I've reviewed your proposed plans. My team has also conducted its own, far more thorough structural and financial audit." Elias felt a surge of indignation. Thorne had already had a team here, behind their backs, looking for flaws. The fight was dirtier than he'd imagined. "And what did your thorough audit reveal, Mr. Thorne?" Elias asked, his voice steady, masking the anger simmering beneath. Thorne leaned forward, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "It revealed what I expected. Extensive foundational issues, outdated electrical and plumbing systems, and a complete lack of compliance with modern safety codes. To bring this building up to standard would cost millions, funds this town simply doesn't possess. Furthermore, your Oakhaven Historical Society is a shell, a defunct entity. Any trust fund associated with it would be easily challenged in court, its funds likely redirected by state authorities due to negligence of oversight." He paused, letting his words sink in, designed to crush their spirit. "In short, Mr. Vance, your efforts, while spirited, are ultimately futile. The hall is a financial and structural impossibility. My offer to purchase and redevelop the land remains the only viable option for progress." A wave of despair rippled through the townsfolk. Mrs. Gable looked devastated, her earlier resolve crumbling. Sarah squeezed Elias's arm, her fear palpable, but Elias held his ground. This was the moment. "Mr. Thorne," Elias began, his voice cutting through the growing murmurs of defeat. "We anticipated your assessment, and we have our own." He pushed forward Sarah's presentation, a sleek, professionally bound document, its cover adorned with a photograph of the restored hall. "We have reactivated the Oakhaven Historical Society with a new board and clear bylaws already filed with the state. We have obtained legal counsel who assures us the Perpetual Maintenance Trust is entirely legitimate and fully accessible, now that its beneficiary oversight body is active. The funds are substantial, more than enough for comprehensive renovation." He paused, then continued, his gaze locking with Thorne's. "And regarding your structural audit, Mr. Thorne, we offer a different perspective. One based not just on observation, but on original, detailed blueprints and a century of meticulously documented repairs." Elias opened his mother's journal and placed it on the table, turning to a page filled with his grandfather's detailed drawings. "These are the original plans, preserved by my mother. They show not only the hall's robust construction, but also the innovative, enduring repairs implemented by my grandfather decades ago. Our architect, reviewing these, confirms the hall's foundational integrity is far superior to what your audit claims." Thorne's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease passing across his face. He picked up the journal, flipping through the pages, his expression growing colder with each diagram, each handwritten note. He paused, his finger tracing a familiar-looking initial. "Vance," he murmured, almost to himself. Elias leaned forward, his voice dropping, carrying an intimate, dangerous weight. "Yes, Vance. My grandfather. The man who ensured this hall would stand, despite the efforts of another ruthless businessman, decades ago." A man who, much like you, Mr. Thorne, tried to seize control of Oakhaven. A man named Julian Thorne. The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation. Thorne froze, his face draining of color. The carefully constructed mask cracked, revealing a raw, visceral shock, followed by a sudden, terrifying fury. He slammed the journal shut, his eyes blazing with an intensity Elias hadn't seen before. "How dare you?" Thorne hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You dredge up ancient history, irrelevant gossip, to discredit me? My grandfather was a visionary, not a marauder." "He was a man who tried to take what wasn't his," Elias countered, unwavering. "And Oakhaven fought him then, just as we are fighting you now. This hall stands as a monument to that victory, a testament to resilience, a legacy of defiance. Your family tried to erase it once. You won't succeed this time." Elias pushed his mother's final letter across the table. "This is from my mother, Mr. Thorne. She foresaw this. She knew the cycle would repeat. She understood the true nature of your ambition." Thorne snatched the letter, his eyes rapidly scanning the fading ink. As he read, his initial fury slowly began to morph into something else, a deep, unsettling silence. His gaze lifted from the letter, meeting Elias's, and for the first time, Elias saw not just rage, but a flicker of something vulnerable, something haunted. The cold, ruthless millionaire seemed to shrink slightly, confronted by the ghosts of his own past, laid bare by the words of a woman long gone. He crumpled the letter in his hand, his eyes burning with an unreadable intensity. The confrontation had turned personal, cutting through his defenses, and Elias knew that Thorne's next move, whatever it was, would not be merely business. It would be a retaliation born of deep-seated fury, an act that would either break Oakhaven or ultimately break Julian Thorne himself. What would a man do when his entire identity was shaken to its core? The answer, Elias feared, would be devastating. Julian Thorne's face, usually a fortress of control, was a canvas of shock and raw fury. The crumpled letter from Elias's mother, a ghost from the past, burned in his hand. The weight of his family's legacy, exposed and challenged, had visibly shaken him. His eyes, fixed on Elias, held a mixture of personal insult and dawning realization. This is a fabrication," Thorne finally spat, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the teacups. "You concoct a ludicrous family narrative to discredit me? To hold this derelict building hostage? This is defamation." Elias held his ground, his gaze unwavering. "It's history, Mr. Thorne. Documented, preserved, and now, finally, revealed. The truth about your grandfather's attempts to seize Oakhaven is no secret to the town's oldest residents. My mother simply ensured that, should the cycle repeat, the evidence would be there." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "We have proof, Mr. Thorne, not just anecdotal. The original county records detailing property disputes, the trust fund established to protect the hall specifically against such attempts. Your family's past ambition is as much a part of Oakhaven's history as the waves on its shore." Thorne's legal team, caught off guard by the sudden, deeply personal turn of the meeting, exchanged worried glances. This was no longer a simple real estate negotiation. This was a war of legacies, a battle fought on the battlefield of generations. Julian Thorne pushed back from the table, rising slowly. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of the townspeople, then on the old piano. He saw not just defiance, but a profound, unbroken connection to their past. The music Elias had played, now amplified by the weight of this history, echoed in the silent hall, a defiant anthem. "Fine," Thorn said, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all pretense of civility. "You want to fight with history? With sentiment? With ghosts? So be it. You have your trust fund. You have your antique blueprints. But you also have limited resources, a rickety building that will cost a fortune to renovate, and a town that will bleed itself dry trying to save it. And I have unlimited resources, a team of top lawyers, and every intention of proving that this trust is nothing more than a legal loophole waiting to be exploited." He turned to his lead lawyer. "File injunctions. Investigate every single clause of that perpetual maintenance trust. Find every possible angle to challenge its validity, its beneficiaries, its very existence. Demand a full environmental impact study of this ancient structure. I want every single obstacle, every single piece of red tape put in their path. Let's see how long their resolve lasts when they're buried under a mountain of legal fees and bureaucratic delays." The air crackled with his fury, his words a chilling promise of protracted warfare. The townsfolk gasped, their faces paling. Elias felt a cold dread in his stomach. Thorn wasn't backing down. He was escalating, bringing his full, overwhelming power to bear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an annihilation. Thorn then turned back to Elias, his eyes blazing. "And as for your mother's letter," he sneered, gesturing dismissively, "it proves nothing but her own paranoia. My grandfather built an empire. He wasn't some petty land grabber. But you, Mr. Vance, you're just a caretaker clinging to relics. This town deserves progress, not dusty nostalgia." He paused, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You think you've won a battle, Mr. Vance? You've just declared war against a far greater opponent than you can imagine. And when you lose, which you will, I will not only demolish this hall, but I will ensure Oak Haven becomes a footnote in history, a town so financially crippled it will never recover. You have made a powerful enemy today, Elias Vance. You will regret this." With that, Thorn spun on his heel and stormed out, his entourage scrambling to follow, leaving behind a profound silence, broken only by the quiet sobs of Mrs. Gable. The elation from the trust fund discovery had vanished, replaced by a crushing sense of dread. Thorn's threat was terrifyingly real. "He's right, Elias," one of the fishermen mumbled, his voice hoarse. "We can't fight him in court. He'll bury us." "We'll lose everything," another added, fear etched onto his face. The unity, so strong moments ago, began to fracture under the weight of Thorn's ruthless power. Sarah, however, walked over to Elias, her hand reaching for his, her eyes alight with a fierce, unwavering determination. "No," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He's wrong. We have more than money, Elias. We have truth. We have a community that won't be bought or intimidated. And we have you. You woke us up. You gave us hope." Elias looked around the devastated faces of his town. The fight was far from over. Thorn would fight dirty, using every legal and financial weapon at his disposal. But as he looked at Sarah, at the quiet strength in her eyes, he felt a flicker of defiance rekindle within him. His mother hadn't just left him a journal, she had left him a belief that the heart of Oak Haven, strong and resilient, could withstand any storm. He knew what he had to do. He had to go on the offensive. Thorn had exposed his vulnerability, his personal vendetta. Elias realized that the only way to truly stop Thorn was to expose his vulnerabilities, to show the world the true cost of his relentless ambition. He needed to find a way to make Julian Thorn feel the same kind of pressure, the same public scrutiny, that Thorn was so expertly inflicting upon Oakhaven. But how do you shine a light into the darkest corners of a man like Thorn, a man who believed himself untouchable? The answer, Elias knew, was hidden somewhere, perhaps in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. And he had to find it before Thorn destroyed everything. The final act was about to begin, and it would be a true test of Oakhaven's enduring spirit. Julian Thorn's chilling threat to bury Oakhaven under a mountain of legal fees and bureaucratic delays echoed in Elias's mind, a dark prophecy. The townspeople were reeling, their newfound hope buckling under the weight of his ruthless power. But as Elias looked at Sarah, her hand still clasped in his, her eyes unwavering despite the fear, he knew Thorn hadn't won. Not yet. "He's banking on us being intimidated, Elias," Sarah said, her voice a fierce whisper, her grip tightening on his hand. "He wants us to think we're powerless, that his money means he can't be touched. But he has a weakness. His reputation. His image." Elias nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the silent piano, its keys still bearing the ugly scratch. His mother's letter had been a revelation, but also a call to arms. "Be Oakhaven," she had written. Oakhaven was not just a place. It was a spirit of defiance, resilience, and community. He had to make Thorn understand that. He exposed his personal vendetta, Elias said, a plan beginning to crystallize in his mind. He doesn't just want the land. He wants to erase a history, a perceived defeat. That's not a business move, Sarah. That's ego. And ego, when exposed, can be a fragile thing. Their strategy was simple, audacious, and profoundly Oakhaven. They wouldn't fight Thorn in court alone. They would fight him in the court of public opinion. They would use the power of story, of music, to expose the truth of his ambition. Sarah, leveraging her connections as a teacher, reached out to regional news outlets, framing the story not as a local land dispute, but as a David and Goliath battle for heritage, pitting a small town soul against a millionaire's relentless greed. The response was immediate. The story of the caretaker who played the piano and saved his town, coupled with the dramatic revelation of a generations-old family feud, was irresistible. Reporters from as far as the state capitol began calling, asking for interviews, demanding access to Oakhaven and its embattled community hall. The next morning, the hall buzzed with a different kind of energy. Not just the quiet work of restoration, but the controlled chaos of a media circus. Cameras were set up, microphones tested, lights shone on the stage. Elias, though uncomfortable with the spotlight, knew this was their only path. The townspeople, initially nervous, found strength in their numbers, in their shared resolve. They wore their Oakhaven United t-shirts, their faces etched with a quiet dignity. Julian Thorn, informed of the media presence, stormed into the hall, his face contorted with fury. He saw the cameras, the eager journalists, and his carefully constructed veneer of control shattered. "What is the meaning of this, Vance?" he roared, his voice echoing through the hall. "You dare turn this into a public spectacle? This is an attempt to slander me." "It's an attempt to tell Oakhaven's story, Mr. Thorn," Elias replied calmly, standing beside Sarah at the podium, the old journal open before them. "A story that begins not today, but decades ago, with your grandfather." A hush fell over the assembled crowd. The cameras zoomed in, sensing the escalating drama. Elias, drawing strength from Sarah's hand on his back, began to speak. He spoke of his mother, of her love for the hall, of her foresight. He spoke of the trust fund, the original blueprints, the enduring spirit of Oakhaven. Then, he delivered the truth of his mother's letter. the generational vendetta, the ambition of the Thorne family that sought to erase Oakhaven's heart. As Elias spoke, Sarah projected images from the journal onto a screen behind him. Faded photographs of his mother and grandfather, meticulous architectural drawings, the trust indenture, even the crumpled letter now smoothed out and enlarged. The narrative was powerful, undeniable, painting Thorne not as a visionary developer, but as a man blindly driven by a family legacy of avarice. Thorne, initially incandescent with rage, found himself cornered. Every attempt to interrupt, to discredit, was met with a wall of journalistic scrutiny and the unwavering gaze of the Oakhaven residents. His lawyers, usually adept at deflecting, struggled against the tide of public sentiment. Then, Elias walked over to the piano. The light from the cameras glinted off the deliberate scratch on the keys, a stark symbol of Thorne's contempt. "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall and across the airwaves. "You mocked me, and you dared me. You promised to marry me if I could play a tune that moved you. And when I did, you tried to silence Oakhaven by ransacking our hall and defiling this piano. You tried to erase our history." He sat down at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. "But Oakhaven remembers. We remember our strength, our beauty, our resilience, and we remember the promise of a future, built on the foundations of our past." And then, Elias began to play. It was the same melody as before, but richer, more powerful, imbued with the weight of generations, the hope of a community, and the fierce love he felt for this place, and for the woman standing beside him. The music swelled, filling the hall, telling a story that words could not fully capture, a story of struggle, of survival, of unwavering hope. It was a lament, a protest, and ultimately, a triumphant declaration. The cameras captured not just Elias's impassioned playing, but Julian Thorne's reaction. Thorne stood transfixed, his face pale, his eyes wide. The music chipped away at his defenses, stripped bare his carefully constructed facade. He looked around at the faces of the Oakhaven residents, their eyes filled with a pride that transcended financial power. He saw the unwavering belief in Elias's eyes, the love for the town reflected in Sarah's tear-filled gaze. For the first time, he wasn't just hearing music. He was hearing Oakhaven's heart, a melody that spoke of true wealth, of a legacy far more profound than any empire he could build. The music ended, the final lingering notes fading into a profound silence. The journalists scribbled furiously. The townspeople held their breath. All eyes were on Julian Thorne. He stood there for a long moment, the crumpled letter still clutched in his hand. His shoulders, usually so rigid, sagged slightly. The hard lines around his mouth softened imperceptibly. Then, he did the unthinkable. He walked towards the piano, not with aggression, but with a strange, hesitant step. He looked at Elias, then at Sarah, then down at the scratched keys. He reached out, his finger tracing the mark. "I underestimated you, Mr. Vance," Thorne said, his voice low, raw, stripped of its arrogance. "And I underestimated Oakhaven." He straightened, taking a deep breath. This is not the fight I intended. My grandfather's ambition, it seems I inherited more than just his business acumen." He paused, his gaze meeting Elias's. "I will withdraw my demolition plans, effective immediately. And I will not challenge the Oakhaven Community Hall Perpetual Maintenance Trust. This hall is yours to keep and to restore." A collective gasp of disbelief, followed by a roar of joyous celebration, erupted from the townsfolk. Relief so profound it was almost painful, washed over Elias. He had won. Oakhaven had won. In the days that followed, the story of Oakhaven's triumph spread. The community hall became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of a united community. Julian Thorne, true to his word, withdrew all his legal challenges. He even, to everyone's astonishment, made a substantial, anonymous donation to the newly reactivated Oakhaven Historical Society, an unexpected act of tacit apology and perhaps a first step towards breaking his family's destructive cycle. The hall thrived. With the trust fund secured and new life breathed into its purpose, it became more vibrant than ever. Sarah developed ambitious arts and education programs, filling the hall with the laughter of children and the creativity of artists. Elias, no longer just a caretaker, became its guardian, its storyteller, its beating heart. He spent hours restoring the piano, carefully filling the scratch, making it whole again, a symbol of healing and enduring beauty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the hall's arched windows, Elias found himself alone at the piano, playing a new melody, one filled with gratitude and a quiet, profound hope. Sarah walked in, her smile mirroring his own. It's beautiful, Elias," she whispered, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. "Just beautiful." He looked up at her, his heart swelling with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He had fought for Oakhaven, for its past and its future, but in doing so he had found something else, something equally precious, a future with Sarah, a symphony of shared dreams. He took her hand, his gaze meeting hers, knowing that this was just the beginning of Oakhaven's next, most harmonious chapter. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that his mother, wherever she was listening and smiling. And so, the quiet chords of a forgotten piano in a small, resilient town swelled into a powerful anthem for justice, for community, and for the enduring strength of the human heart. Elias Vance, the humble caretaker, proved that true genius isn't always loud or celebrated, but often resides in the quietest places, waiting for the moment to ignite and challenge the most formidable of adversaries. His story, and Oakhaven's, reminds us that the true value of a place or a person cannot be measured in dollars and cents, but in the memories it holds, the connections it fosters, and the spirit it embodies. This tale is a testament to the idea that even against overwhelming power and generations of ingrained ambition, a united community, armed with truth, heritage, and unwavering love, can move mountains, or in this case, save a beloved hall. It shows us that even the coldest hearts can be touched by the profound beauty of music and the undeniable weight of a shared legacy. Julian Thorne, confronted by the ghosts of his past and the undeniable heart of Oakhaven, found a chance at redemption, proving that cycles of greed can be broken and that transformation is always possible. May Elias's journey inspire you to find your own hidden strengths, to stand firm for what you believe in, and to cherish the precious, intangible threads that weave your life's most meaningful stories. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day, designed to inspire and uplift. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.